Don't let the big scary equations fool you. Economics isn't just about maths and hard facts. Human psychology matters too. The decision to build a factory or buy a house can sometimes boil down to mood as much as money. If consumers and business people are feeling depressed, the economy may follow suit. And if they're pumped up about the future, then it can drive growth. It's what the great 20th century economist John Maynard Keynes called animal spirits. And it's something that's coming sharply into focus in China right now, because a whole generation of graduates there is feeling pessimistic. Locked out of the jobs market in a spluttering economy, they're taking to social media to complain about their plight. The result? Memes of despair, in a worrying sign for the state of China's animal spirits. We're using one of those memes as the title of this week's pod, Rotten Tail Kids. It's what we do here on Reuters Econ World. Every week, we pick a phrase or buzzword and go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. This week, China and the Rotten Tail Kids. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins, in Dublin. Timing is everything in life. I don't have to tell that to the class of 2024 in China. They're arriving onto the jobs market with the world's second largest economy in a dismal state. Not for them the boom times of their parents' generation, or the expected career path after years of study. And Chinese President Xi Jinping's focus on new productive forces to boost the economy won't necessarily help them. That focus on high-tech industries like AI, electric vehicles and semiconductors may lift growth, but it could kill off some jobs. No wonder graduates are so downbeat. So what does their plight and their mood mean for China? Joining me today to discuss all of this is Reuters Greater China Bureau Chief Kevin Krolicki. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kevin, you helped us launch Reuters Econ World back in May when we discussed protectionism through the prism of the US-China relationship. Things weren't good economically for China back then, and it's no better now. Beijing is still targeting growth of 5% this year, but the second quarter was pretty dismal, and further momentum was lost over the summer.
No, that's right. I think there has been an investor, analyst hope, maybe now expectation earlier that we would see more aggressive policy on the fiscal side to support consumption. It hasn't materialized. I mean, just to put the numbers in perspective, because many of the economic indicators by those sort of established standards of, say, the United States or European economies, on paper don't look that bad. 5% growth for the full year, which is still the expectation, doesn't look bad.
We'd be delighted with 5% growth in Europe.
Right. It's just that in the context of China, especially so if you think about kids who are graduating now from college, they grew up at a time of much faster growth, growth that's averaged twice that since China's opening up, peaked at 14%. So it's the rate of growth has slowed substantially. I think the indicator that really kind of raised an alarm was the youth unemployment data that we had last month.
It's extraordinarily high, Kevin.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Who are we talking about here?
Right. So they look at a cohort of people aged 16 to 24.
Right.
They exclude those in school. So these are young people who have finished education and at some level and are looking for jobs. They changed the methodology for this report. And there's a period of months where they weren't posting the data. They excluded in the new methodology people aged 16 to 24 who are still in school, but also looking for work.
Okay.
So that had the effect of making it look better on paper.
Right.
But in July, even according to the new terms of this monthly survey, you've got over 17% unemployment in this group of people, 16 to 24.
Wow.
So close to 1 in 5. And I was just going to make the point also that the scale really matters because in China this summer, China produced something like 12 million new college graduates. So it's the equivalent of like 3 Los Angeleses all out there expecting to start careers and start to build wealth and start to work toward the China dream.
And the dream really isn't happening for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is some pretty bitter grumbling, I would say, online. And you're seeing kind of the emergence of terms to describe these economic frustrations that kind of flare up in popularity on Chinese social media, often then are censored and squelched. But it's one way of kind of getting a read on the animal spirits of this group.
Tell us about the rotten tail kids, Kevin.
Yeah, so this is a term that's emerged in the recent weeks. It's a play in Chinese on the term for unfinished housing. So it could literally translated rotten tail kids, but a reference to the housing crisis that's really been at the heart of the kind of clamp on consumption over the last 3 years, because we have tens of millions of unfinished apartments, most of which were prepaid, pre-sold. It's 70% of household wealth. And a lot of it is just locked up now in these projects that have stalled as developers have gone bankrupt. So it's comparing the prior economic crisis, I guess, to sort of the emerging one for unemployment, all in a very short phrase.
It's so fatalistic. It's very stark. Really, it's eye-catching. But it's not the only one, right? There have been other kind of memes of desperation.
Right. So, another that emerged a few months ago was the garbage time of history. This claim online that China was living through the garbage time of history. It's again, like rotten tail kids. It's a very striking term. There's a bit of a debate online about where this term originates from. It just seems to be a reference to basketball, actually.
Oh, wow.
So when one side is winning so disproportionately that in the final minutes of the game, no single player's effort on the losing side matters much.
Right.
That's the garbage time. And so the idea is this is where China is. Anything you do is futile. The result is at this point set and the outcome is certain and you're losing. This message of defeatism in the eyes of, I think, of the state-backed commentators who spoke out against this kind of really hit a nerve. And a lot of these posts were censored. They were taken down. They kind of propagated in other ways. But again, as with rotten tail kids, a really striking term that again points to the mood of quiet desperation.
And this criticism is significant, Kevin, not only, of course, for what it says about the animal spirits, but also because it's actually criticism being aired publicly.
Yeah, it is. It's significant, I think, in the first instance, because the room for open discussion is very limited. And a lot of these posts kind of walk a line between describing personal experience and making a broader point. Many of them kind of are taken down over time. So they're clearly emerging topics of concern for Beijing. But, just the degree of the discussion and sort of the implicit frustration, in some cases despair, is really striking.
So beyond social media, how are these graduates dealing with their situation?
It's interesting. So we've talked to a number of them. They're looking for anything. Part of the challenge, though, is even the jobs that would have been sort of not quite safety net jobs, but something provisional you could do while you were looking for something better. Those jobs are much harder to find. So if you look at the gig economy jobs,
right?
Ride hailing or delivery, which is a notoriously hard place to work in China.
Yeah,
there are too many of China has overcapacity of people doing those jobs too. The number of ride hailing drivers, for example, it's up at 7 million. It was just 4 million a couple of years ago. Delivery drivers, I think 10 million.
Wow.
So it's more than the market can bear there too. So there really aren't easy options. I mean, in some cases, you're seeing people kind of going online and trying to make a personal brand on economic misery, kind of making a job out of their unemployment almost.
And where are they living? Are they staying at home with mom and dad? Are they moving back to the countryside? What's happening there?
I think people are describing both. It's hard to know in sort of net, detailed, quantitative terms, but people are describing both. They're back with families, or they've kind of given up on a job in one of the bigger cities that are, that had been kind of magnets for upward mobility, and they're returning home. So, I mean, in addition to the squeeze on the gig economy, other alternatives aren't really there too. I mean, I think a generation ago, college graduates would have looked at a job in the public sector as steady. It's guaranteed lifetime employment.
Yeah.
It's described as the iron rice bowl, could never be broken.
Right.
But you're seeing local governments also retrenching and restructuring and cutting jobs. So there really aren't great alternatives out there.
And some people have been looking to take advantage of this situation, right, Kevin?
I think we've seen a little signs of kind of a boom in the scam economy. People are describing fraud in which new graduates, job seekers, also mid-career job seekers pay recruitment fees for jobs that don't exist or are encouraged to borrow money for a payoff in terms of employment that's not there. And the prosecutors have said that increasingly these kinds of scams are targeting fresh graduates where they're desperate for all the reasons we've described.
How worried is Beijing about all of this?
Well, youth unemployment, or as they would say, creating jobs for this new group of graduates, for younger people, is a policy priority. And they're keen to show success against that metric. So it's very important. And I think there's a recognition that these early career earnings and opportunities compound over time.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a tension also in Chinese economic policy. The central focus right now is on creating what they've called new productive forces. It's a focus on cutting edge industry and technology. It includes things like autonomous drive, robotics, AI. The challenge is, and we're already seeing real world examples, but the challenge is in the first instance, these enormous efficiencies are also job killers.
So the rotten tail kids are now competing against robots and artificial intelligence. How's that working out for them? What's the salary for a graduate versus the operating cost for a humanoid robot? Let's look at some real-world examples to try and find out. And we start in the city of Wuhan. Familiar to most listeners because that's where the COVID-19 virus was first identified back in 2019. But beyond that dubious honour, Wuhan is also famous for something else. It's a trailblazer in the rollout of driverless cars.
Autonomous driving has just been launched.
Tell us more, Kevin.
Absolutely. The key player here is a company called Apollo Go. It's a subsidiary of Baidu, the web giant. They're on track to have 1,000 robotaxis in Wuhan by the end of the year. And already you have drivers, these are ride-hailing drivers and taxi drivers, complaining that they're driving down fares, taking jobs, and they have a nickname for them that's, again, in Chinese, a pun on the name of the company. They call them stupid radishes. So the army of stupid radishes has come to steal the future.
Seeing these driverless cars, it's the future right there in front of you. But it's not just in the auto market, right?
No, it's not. I mean, we just last week in Beijing, we had a conference, a global robotics conference, and China is already the biggest industrial customer for robots. And the last generation industrial robots, you think of those big mechanized arms by the likes of ABB, Fanuc, and KUKA, were one wave of kind of innovation and factory efficiency. The next wave is expected to be these humanoid robots that Tesla is prototyping with its Optimus project. And what's interesting in China is now you have dozens of companies, fairly large, billions of dollars of state support for this industry, and the expectation that these humanoid robots in the coming year or two are going to start to take factory assembly jobs that would otherwise be done by people.
Has anyone done the math on it? Has anyone, tried to calculate what the impact could be in terms of job losses in China?
I don't know if there's a China-specific number. Part of it is the cost of the robot versus the salary of the human. Some of these Chinese companies believe that they can get the humanoid robot cost down to $30,000 or even $20,000. And then you can see at that point, a robot that can do the same 8-hour shift that a human could have done becomes a compelling investment.
Wow.
I think Goldman Sachs has said they see a case in which 15% of these kinds of factory jobs over time, over the longer term, could be done by robots.
Wow. And there's also, it's fascinating. I was reading about even in driving schools, the driving instructors, they need less driving instructors.
Yeah.
Already?
Yeah. One of the reporters in our office went to get a driver's license and was amazed to learn that the driving instructor was not a human. It would be a robot, essentially. And it's not full self-driving. It's an earlier generation of technology, but we found that this driving school outside Beijing, which says it's the largest driving school in the world, has a credible claim to that, has been able to cut its employment in half because it's able to use sensors and autonomous drive technology to both teach people how to drive and then score them on their accuracy.
Wow. I can't get my head around it. Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
It's a pretty amazing place. Yeah, they have a massive NASA-like control room screen where you get feedback on every driver on the course. And this is a huge place that's open 24/7 all around the year.
Wow. So people are actually being effectively instructed or taught by like the algorithm or the robot, right? Like, am I even using the right words?
Right. I mean, if you believe the sort of the bull case here, possibly the last generation of human drivers is already being taught how to drive by robots.
Wow.
It's another area of real tension.
Mm.
And again, the tension is it kind of goes right to the core of the current priorities. It's between innovation and job preservation. And
Yeah.
government officials and people who are close to the process say managing that tension over time is the central thing they have to do.
So you spoke, very eloquently there about the tension. So what is Beijing, what is Xi Jinping doing to deal with this?
There has been, among analysts, among investors, there's been some disappointment that we didn't get more to boost consumption, to sort of reorient the economy more towards household consumption.
Mm.
You mentioned the animal spirits and how people are feeling feeds back into the real economy. I mean, Chinese households are legendary great savers. They do that against the risk of future unforeseen events and also, of course, education for kids, weddings, and the like. But many economists believe what you have to do is get more money in the hands of consumers who will spend it. So far, we haven't seen a kind of large scale or significant reorientation in policy toward that goal.
When we're talking about these kind of the generational shifts that are being caused by this economic conditions, one thing, of course, is, China does want to boost its birth rate. And I suppose there's an irony here that the people who it wants to have children are kind of stuck. Does that kind of add to the pressure? People are at home, they're living with their parents, they haven't got a job, they're probably unlikely to want to start a family.
Yeah, I think demographers who look at those trends think all these factors are related. One interesting movie, just to talk about popular culture for a moment, that came out this summer was called Upstream. It was briefly the most watched, biggest box office movie in China. It looks at the really tough life facing these delivery drivers.
Yeah.
For mostly for food. In this case, these drivers are wearing uniforms that are a clear reference to Meituan, one of the big companies here, the largest. That story looks at a middle-aged computer programmer who loses his job, is forced into this work, making $1 a delivery. It's sort of positioned as a comedy. It's not really a comedy, but
doesn't sound like one.
No. And some of the commentary online just harkens back to what you were saying, where people said in response in a discussion of the movie, it just shows that going to a good university, getting a technical degree, an engineering degree or a computer degree is no guarantee of economic success in life. What you have to do is not buy a house, not get married, and not have kids to have a margin to live through tough times that could be coming.
Wow. That's very stark. Again, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but has anyone, economists, tried to crunch the numbers and to kind of extrapolate what this big surge in youth unemployment could mean for the economy in the next sort of 5 years, 10 years? The kind of the legacy, I suppose, the future legacy.
It's a great question. I'm not aware of a study that does that, but it does feel like what's happening here is it's economic history in real time.
That's it for this week's episode of Reuters Econ World. Thanks to Kevin and the whole team covering the China economy. You can catch their great work on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. A quick reminder that there's a newsletter to accompany this show. You can sign up for it on Reuters.com or the app. Sound design, music composition, and engineering on this episode was by Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vinnell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Christopher Walljasper, and Sharon Wright Garson. Our executive producer is Leela de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.